I said to him, Wolfgang, you don't have a mandate for Grexit. So all these discussions that we've been having, that you initiated against my better judgment on what should be done, all these discussions are academic because you don't have a mandate for Grexit.
What was your personal situation when you came into power, member of the government?
My personal situation? You mean how did I experience having won?
Yeah.
Well, it's quite astonishing that one takes over a Ministry of Finance under the pressures that we had to face. Let me give you an example. One of the first things you do is you try to work out what the fiscal and funding position of the government is. And I was told in no uncertain terms on my first day in the job that we are running out of money within 13 to 14 days. In other words, within 13 or 14 days, we would either have to default to some of our creditors, or we wouldn't be able to make payments to civil servants or to pensioners. I don't believe that there have been many occasions when in a European nation an incoming finance minister is faced with that conundrum.
What was your plan concerning the debt crisis?
Well, our plan was very, very simple. It was to go to our partners in Europe and to say to them, folks, we have a problem, and you have a problem. You have lent the largest amount of money in the history of humanity to the most bankrupt public sector, to the most bankrupt state, on conditions of austerity that shrink the incomes from which these old and new loans will have to be repaid. This cannot end well. What we need to do is sit down and find a sensible arrangement so that two things happen. Firstly, we restructure the debt in order to be able to pay more of it. And secondly, we start growing the economy through very deep reforms that this country needs, which the previous governments only spoke about but never implemented. And at the same time, a relaxation of the fiscal consolidation, which is killing demand and therefore ensuring this collapse of incomes. We were very sincere about that. We went to various capitals around Europe. We spoke to the International Monetary Fund, who lent a more sympathetic ear to this narrative. And we said to them, we have a joint interest here. But in order to make this thing work, to change the tide, a very vicious tide, we need to find an accommodation. We need to water down many parts of our mandate, of our electoral promises to the Greek people, naturally. And you have to accept that the program that you have been imposing so ruthlessly on this country has failed. So we need to establish this common ground. We talked about a bridge, common ground, mutual interests. That was our language, that was our narrative. On the other side, we had point-blank refusal to engage.
I talked to Schäuble on several occasions within the last 5 months, and he repeatedly said that he didn't trust you.
Me personally, or Greece. There's a big difference there, because he said that he trusts me personally, but he doesn't trust the Greek government, or any Greek government for that matter.
He said he doesn't trust the Greek government, but
Yeah.
you've been member of the Greek government.
But that's not the same.
So I'm not talking about you privately or on a personal level, but Schäuble said he didn't understand your plan. How came?
I don't think that he didn't understand the plan. I don't think he cared for it. I don't think he cared for any plan. I don't think he even read it, because he had a very specific plan of his own, Grexit. So the worst thing I could have done would be to present a credible plan for Greece within the euro that he liked. He made this very clear and disarmingly, honestly clear, which I appreciate. He's probably the only person in there who spoke the truth to me every single time he opened his mouth, because his view was, this country of yours, this economy of yours, has no place in the Eurozone. your government, previous governments, cannot make commitments that they can fulfill or that they will fulfill. At the personal level, I think because we established this dialogue which was based on honesty, and I made it clear to him that I would never make commitments on primary surpluses, on tax collection and so on, that I couldn't I couldn't fulfill. Unlike other finance ministers who would promise anything in order to get the next loan tranche. I think he trusted that and he accepted that, but he realized that somebody like me could not last very long. So, in that sense, I understand his perspective.
You've been in numerous meetings and bilateral talks with Schäuble. When and how did you realize that he has a Grexit plan?
When he told me.
How and when?
Sometime in March. It was clear that all my attempts to engage him in the discussion about our reforming agenda, about fiscal consolidation on the one hand, debt restructuring on the other, all these ideas were falling on deaf ears. You could see that he was switching off. And I can understand why, because from his perspective, Greece was not reformable within the Eurozone, and from his perspective, it was important, as I was saying before, to turn Greece into a sacrificial lamb for other purposes. So he only became engaged, seriously engaged, and humanly engaged with me when he tried to convince me about the necessity of a Grexit, of why it would be good for Europe and good for Greece. So this is one of those rare moments, especially for somebody who spent all his life, like me, being a theoretician, when you don't need a theory. I don't need to have a theory about Dr. Schäuble and Grexit, because he comes to you and tells you about it. So it's one of those liberating moments when life takes over from theory.
I'm quite surprised because I've been following him during all these months and I didn't realize it. It wasn't spoken about it publicly.
Well, no,
why didn't you talk about it publicly?
Well, I didn't have the right to do it because you have to understand that the very mention of Grexit can bring about a series or a sequence of events that destroy the solidity and the indivisibility of the Eurozone. Because once you start talking about fragmentation of a monetary union, if you're doing it from the position of being a Minister of Finance who has the power to affect it, if you so choose, then suddenly confidence in the solidity and indivisibility of the Eurozone goes. The markets react. Depositors remove their money from the parts of the Eurozone which will be amputated, shift the money to Frankfurt, and then you simply bring it about just because you've spoken about it. It's the power of prophecy or the power of declaration. It's a little bit like devaluation in a country that controls its currency. You don't have a finance minister having an academic discussion about devaluing the currency, because immediately the currency will be devalued. You see, this is the difference between society and nature. In nature, we can discuss the weather to our heart's content. It's not going to change the weather. But in the economy, in society, if we begin talking about Grexit, then Grexit may happen just because we're talking about it. So I had no mandate to discuss it. Grexit was not something we wanted. We still feel, this government, my party, me personally, that Grexit would be a catastrophe for Greece and a catastrophe for Europe. So the last thing I had the right to do was to leave Dr. Schäuble's office and say, we'd spent an hour and a half discussing Grexit.
Was it in his office in Berlin?
It was in his... we've had this conversation in Brussels the first time and in Berlin another time. In his office, yes.
When you came to Berlin to his office the second time or the first time?
The second time.
Okay. Was it a poker game?
I'm not sure. I wasn't playing a poker game. I made this absolutely clear from the moment I was elected. I actually wrote an article in the New York Times, and the title was, if I remember correctly, No Time for Games. When you're the Minister of Finance of a bankrupt nation, struggling to render this nation and its economy viable again, I don't think you have the ethical right to play games. What you do is you state what you think needs to be done, and you stick to it. This is, I'm a left-winger, but I happen to admire people like both Schäuble and Margaret Thatcher, who were conviction politicians. The left needs conviction politicians too. So I tried to be a conviction politician. I think I succeeded, not in the sense of the outcome, but in terms of maintaining conviction politics as my strategy, or my demeanor, my behavior. And I only stated that which I believed to be true, and that from which I would not budge ever. So for me, poker is when you pretend that you have an ace when you have a 7. I never did that. I always said I have a 7. How can we turn this into a 9? Together for mutual benefit. That was my line. Was Dr. Schäuble playing a game? We feared that he might. So some people ask me now, even within my party, why didn't you take seriously his offer of a velvet divorce, of a Grexit that is agreed, and during which Germany, Europe, the IMF helped Greece exit the Eurozone? Well, my answer was first because I didn't believe in it, and secondly, because it was not entirely certain that Dr. Schäuble would honor his pledges once the cat was out of the bag and once the process had begun. There was another issue too. It concerns his own mandate. At some point when we were having this conversation, I asked him whether he has a mandate. You know what I mean by that?
For Grexit?
Yes, from the Chancellor. I won't give you details, but all I'm going to say is that we worked out that he didn't. And I confronted him on this on another occasion, and I said to him, Wolfgang, you don't have a mandate for Grexit. So all these discussions that we've been having, that you initiated against my better judgment on what should be done, all these discussions are academic, because you don't have a mandate for Grexit. I don't have a mandate to sign an MOU that is senseless macroeconomically and catastrophic socially. So we're going for the rocks. And people out there, I was in Berlin, so I pointed out to the people of Germany, deserve better. And so do my people back in Greece. And you keep telling me to go to the institutions, to the Troika, to negotiate. But you know what? The people out there didn't vote for Lagarde. They didn't vote for Draghi. They didn't vote for Moscovici. They voted for you and me. We have a historic duty to fix this mess. And by sending me all the time to the Troika to negotiate with them when you really want Grexit, but you don't have the mandate for it, this is a kind of dereliction of duty. And history is going to be very harsh on both of us. And he just did this. What can I do?
So you felt there was a division within the German government between him and Chancellor Merkel?
Oh, I know there was.
Can you say it again?
I know there was.
How?
Well, you will allow me not to reveal my sources, but it is clear that Dr. Schäuble did not have a mandate to push for Grexit. From the Chancellery, he didn't.
You called the finance ministers, if I got you right, terrorists.
No, I didn't do that.
And let me add complete my question.
I said the Eurogroup terrorized the Greek people. I didn't call them terrorists. There's a difference. I can terrorize you without being a terrorist. I didn't call anyone a terrorist. I said the Eurogroup terrorized the Greek people. And I stick to this. I can assure you that if the Eurogroup were to shut down all German banks as a punishment for the fact that the German government called a referendum to ask the German people to pontificate on whether some agreement should be accepted or not, I'm sure you'd also agree that the Eurogroup tried to terrorize the German voters into voting in a particular way, because there is nothing more terroristic in a financialized economy, monetized economy, than closing down people's banks. We have a situation here where the Central Bank of Europe closed down banks which it itself considers to be solvent. Why? Because I don't blame the Central Bank, I blame the Eurogroup that pulled the plug, forcing Draghi to cut ELA increases to our banks and therefore shutting them down. Why? Because we had the audacity, when Dijsselbloem presented me with what effectively was a take it or leave it offer on the 25th of June, and the government looked at it and we decided that, look, this is an unworkable, unviable agreement. At the same time, we don't have a mandate to say no to Europe and to clash with Europe. So we'll take it to the Greek people. If the Greek people want it, we will adopt it. If they don't, then we will negotiate further. And because we had the audacity to take this to the Greek people, our banking system was closed down by a central bank that considered it to be solvent. That is an attempt to terrorize voters to vote in a particular way. It's a highly political, highly toxic, brutal assault on basic principles of democratic rights of the Greek people. I stand by that expression. I never called anybody a terrorist, but you know that people can be terrorized in the absence of terrorists.
I understand. When the situation, the economic and financial situation of Greece became worse and worse, did you have a plan for an alternative currency?
No, we didn't have a plan for alternative currency.
What was your plan B?
I'll tell you what it was. Look, when you have clear threats of being pushed out of the Eurozone, when you have a plan by Dr. Schäuble for Grexit and forced Grexit through pushing you to the edge to such an extent that at some point maybe you don't have an alternative but to issue your own currency. When you have Dijsselbloem coming to my office in week 1, threatening me with a Cyprus solution in inverted commas, it would take an incredible degree of irresponsibility not to have a small group of people in the ministry designing defensive moves. So we did have that group working, highly intelligent, highly professional people, most of them not from Greece, working on a plan for how to respond to any attempt like that which happened in the end, of shutting down our banks in order to blackmail the Greek people in a particular way. But what we were going to do in terms of liquidity would be to try to use means, like for instance IOUs, that would be euro-denominated so as not to get out of the euro, to give us more time to bargain, to negotiate a viable agreement within the euro. So we never set out to plan Grexit. If we wanted to do that, we would have agreed with Dr. Schäuble. We set out to create alternative forms of liquidity, euro-denominated liquidity, like California did, for instance, when it was in crisis. California used IOUs in dollar-denominated paper so that it wouldn't have to leave the dollar zone. That's what we were doing as well.
Can you describe this in a bit more details? Because I understand that you couldn't speak about it publicly when you had this war room, I understand, or the war cabinet.
Yes. Well, there's the war cabinet, which is the prime minister, the deputy prime minister, the bargaining team, and I had my own war room in the ministry, putting together a plan, sort of an emergency plan in case we were, in case there were aggressive acts like shutting banks down or trying to push us out of the Eurozone.
Okay, what were the steps of this plan?
Well, it's a very complicated document, many different steps, many different ways of dealing with the situation, different scenario, and it is impossible to convey it to you in
I don't need all the details,
but
some of them.
But as I said, the main point would be to create a parallel payment system in euros that would allow us time so that when the ECB would pull the plug from the banks, either fully or partially, as I did, we would be able to maintain economic activity using this parallel payment system sufficiently long for Mrs. Merkel, President Hollande, Prime Minister Tsipras, Mr. Juncker to work out a deal that would keep us in the Eurozone, but in a viable manner.
How didn't you, or why didn't you manage to realize this plan?
Well, the answer to this question, which is a very good question, is very simple. When the Eurogroup pulled the plug and effectively forced the ECB to shut down our banking system, the War Cabinet outvoted me. I was in a minority when I suggested that we should energize this plan. Instead, we went along in exactly the same way that was designed by those who wanted to asphyxiate the Greek government and force the Prime Minister to capitulate, as he did.
A parallel currency in euro, did I get you right?
Yes.
How can I understand a parallel currency to euro? Because I only understand there's 1 euro. What is a parallel currency to euro?
Okay, let me give you a simple example. Okay. Imagine, this is just a theoretical example, okay? But I'm speaking to you now as an academic economist. Imagine a situation where the website of the tax system, where you enter in order to pay your taxes. In Germany, I'm sure you do that. So you use web banking to transfer from your bank to your tax file number, for income tax, VAT, charges for car registration, whatever. Now imagine that this website, which belongs to the Ministry of Finance, to the tax office, has created for every tax file number a reserve account. And imagine that now the state owes you 10,000 euros because you've provided some service or some good to the state. And the state cannot give you this money because liquidity has been switched off. What if the state were suddenly to put in that reserve account of yours, which hangs under your tax file number 10,000, the number 10,000, which can be done digitally, and at the same time provide you with a PIN number so that you can transfer it to the tax file number of any German citizen or company, or indeed use it in order to pay taxes. Suddenly you have a parallel payment system which is outside the banking sector in euros.
Okay. Not that easy, but...
Not difficult. Technically, it's straightforward.
What was your plan concerning the Greek central bank, referring to this plan B?
Well, we didn't have any specific views on that. There were different scenarios that we considered. Ideally, what we would want to do is create a system of euro-denominated parallel payments like the one that I described to you in order not to change much, in order to buy time and have a decent agreement, an honorable agreement, an agreement that is built on the common ground between our government's priorities, our economy's needs, and the MOU. But if the other side continues to asphyxiate you, continues to use the central bank in order to essentially conduct a coup d'etat, to replace your government because they never liked it in the first place, then you may consider legal steps against the central bank. Oh. This is what national sovereignty and common decency dictates.
What steps?
Well, the nationalization of the central bank. If you reach that stage when you realize that you're facing an emergency, you're facing a coup d'etat.
Did you ever talk about this plan B with your opponents?
Never. Because I never use, you see, the best weapons are the ones you don't use and you don't announce. We never wanted to use any of this. We were never going to use any of this. These were simply defensive measures in case they shut down our banks, in case they tried to throw us out of the euro, in case there was a financial coup d'etat. And all this was done all that this was designed, nothing was done. It was all at the design level, at the behest of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. As a Minister of Finance, I had to have a contingency plan. It would be highly remiss of me not to have a contingency plan. The ECB has one. The German government had one. The British government had one. The French government had one. We had to have one. What was very interesting here in the Greek political context was, for a while I was being lambasted by the opposition that I didn't have plan B. When I came out and declared that I had a plan B, I was lambasted for having had a plan B. So, some issues you cannot win.
I don't want to hear any names, but you said the members of this group were not only Greeks. Mm-hmm. Where did they come from? And how many were there?
Not many. We're talking about 5, 6, 7 people altogether, and I'm not telling you where they came from.
But where? Okay, anyway, I stop it. I'm not pushing you. But this was your group, not Prime Minister Tsipras' group.
The Prime Minister asked me to create this group. He was fully informed about who was in it, and he was given the reports that group produced. And I remember saying to him, when he asked for it, I said to him, well, make sure that, take a few deep breaths before you read it, because it's very depressing reading, because none of those measures were measures we wanted to implement. We dearly wanted to avert having come to the point of even having to consider them. But that's what happens in an emergency situation when you're faced by immense hostility. And this instrumental logic, which treats a proud nation like Greece as fodder, as a pawn to be sacrificed on a larger chessboard.
What was your situation when the Greek banks were shut down?
I was the person who was responsible for managing the shutdown. It was an awful 24 hours. Every 30 seconds, some emergency that was unforeseen emerged. We had a real war cabinet there, trying to coordinate the functioning of the payment system and the banking system while shutting it down. It was a nightmare. It was an indignity for all of Europe that my ministry had to go through this.